Sometimes, a crime happens that's so bizarre, so surreal, that people struggle to believe it was real. Imagine this. You're sitting at home, watching the news, and on live TV, you see two men holding hostages at gunpoint. One of the hostages, trembling, with tears in her eyes, leans into a journalist's microphone and whispers, "Please, help us." But instead of rescue, cameras just keep rolling. Reporters keep asking questions. Some even hand the criminals drinks and cigarettes. The entire nation watches as the hostage takers become celebrities, giving interviews while pointing guns at innocent people. It sounds like a twisted movie, but it really happened. My name is Alex, and today I'm taking you into one of Germany's darkest chapters, the Gladbeck hostage crisis. A story not just about crime, but about how the hunger for a good story turned journalists into unwitting accomplices and left two young people dead. Let me take you back to the summer of 1988. West Germany was thriving. The economy was strong. People were living good lives, thinking about vacations, the upcoming fall, and maybe, just maybe, whether the Berlin Wall might someday come down. In the midst of this seemingly safe world were two men, Hans-Jürgen Rösner and Dieter Degowski. Rösner was a career criminal, tall and intense, with eyes that never seemed to stop moving. He'd been in prison so often that some said he seemed more at home behind bars than on the outside. Dieter Degowski was different, quieter, shorter, but with a fuse that could light up in an instant. A man haunted by his own rage and utterly terrified of going back to prison. The two were friends, or perhaps co-conspirators is a better word. Both were broke. Both were angry. Both felt the world owed them something. And so, on August 16th, they hatched what they thought would be an easy plan. Rob a bank, get some quick money, disappear. But there was nothing easy about what would happen next. That morning, they walked into a Deutsche Bank branch in Gladbeck. No masks, guns hidden under jackets, confident, or maybe just desperate. They ordered staff and customers onto the floor, shouted for money, and then the silent alarm was triggered. Police cars arrived within minutes, surrounding the bank from all sides. Blue lights flashing in the morning sun. Officers crouched behind car doors, rifles aimed at the glass doors. Rösner and Degowski peered through the blinds and realized their simple heist had become a prison of glass and concrete. And that was when they made a choice. The choice that would send Germany into chaos. Instead of surrendering, Rösner and Degowski grabbed two hostages, Ingeborg Schmitz and Ulrich Opfermann, both bank employees, guns pressed into ribs, fear on the hostages' faces. The police began negotiating. They wanted the hostages safe. They wanted a peaceful end. But Rösner and Degowski wanted freedom and attention. And here's where this story takes a turn from frightening to downright surreal. The police agreed to their demands. Rösner and Degowski were given a getaway car, a white Audi 100, and cash. But the moment they stepped out of the bank, dragging their hostages with them, dozens of journalists were waiting. Cameras rolled as Rösner waved his pistol in the air, shouting threats. Reporters called out questions. "Why are you doing this?" One even shoved a microphone so close to the gun barrel that you could almost see the reflection of the black metal in the camera lens. And the hostages, trembling, crying. Ulrich Opfermann was forced to give a short interview, barely able to speak. This wasn't a secret police operation. It was a spectacle, and the whole country was watching. And somewhere in all that chaos, the criminals seemed to realize they were now the stars of their own show. Over the next day and a half, Rosner and Degowski led police, and more notably the press, on a twisted road trip across Western Germany. They weren't hiding. They weren't running. They were performing. The Audi 100, their makeshift getaway car, became a rolling stage. From the city streets of Gladbeck to highways cutting through rural landscapes, they traveled fast and without a clear destination, like fugitives with nowhere to go but forward. At every stop, it was the same scene. Cameras, reporters, photographers, journalists in unmarked cars and rental vans tailgated them like paparazzi, jostling for a better angle, not of celebrities, but of two armed hostage takers who seemed to be enjoying every second of the attention. Some shouted questions, others shoved microphones through half-open windows, and Rosner, he answered them, calmly, boldly, sometimes even with a grin. It was as if he'd mistaken the chaos for a press tour, as if this entire crisis had been arranged to boost his ego. At one gas station stop, reporters approached the car without hesitation. They handed Rosner cigarettes. One even passed him a soda. Degowski sat mostly silent, but his eyes moved rapidly, scanning everyone, twitching with tension. The two hostages, Ingeborg Schmitz and Ulrich Opfermann, were still crammed into the back seat, pale, silent, barely able to speak. They had guns inches from their bodies and cameras inches from their faces. No place to run, no place to hide. Just watch and hope. By this point, the police had essentially taken on the role of quiet observers. They trailed the car, kept their distance, and allowed the situation to play out. Their strategy was based on one thing: don't provoke the gunman. But to many watching on live television, it looked like the police had lost control entirely, and the hostage takers could feel it. With each passing hour, they became bolder, as if every news flash, every photo, every headline fed their delusion of power. Rosner even gave a televised statement at one point, laughing as he claimed that the police were helpless. He dared them to act. He said, "They can't touch us." He was starting to believe it. But what no one knew was that this grotesque spectacle, this circus of crime and cameras, was about to get even worse. Because ahead of them, just outside the city of Bremen, stood a bus filled with passengers. And that bus would soon become the next stage for an even darker chapter. By the time Rosner and Degowski reached Bremen, it was the morning of August 17th. They were restless, unfocused, increasingly erratic. The hostages were exhausted, emotionally worn down after nearly 24 hours of fear. But the ordeal wasn't over. On a quiet suburban street, the two men spotted a public bus, line 31. They stopped the Audi, approached, and within seconds, they had taken over the vehicle. Inside were more than 30 passengers, including commuters, elderly people, and children. Panic swept through the bus as the two armed men gave loud, disjointed commands. No one knew what would happen next. The bus was now their new stage, larger, louder, and tragically, more public. And once again, the press arrived before any real plan could be executed. Journalists surrounded the vehicle, cameras zoomed in on windows, some even shouted questions to passengers and the hostage takers through the glass. One climbed the steps and spoke directly to one of the men. The line between observation and interference had now been completely erased. Inside the bus, tensions grew worse. In the middle of the chaos, a young passenger, 15-year-old Emanuele De Giorgi, attempted to resist. He took a chance, tried to intervene. What followed left him gravely hurt. Despite the urgency of the situation, no immediate help reached him. Outside, reporters continued filming. The air was filled with confusion, tension, and the unsettling rhythm of camera shutters. And then came a moment that would stay with Germany for decades. Silke Bischoff, still held hostage, was asked to come forward. She stepped toward the window, gently led by Rösner. Her eyes were wide, her voice trembling as she leaned closer. She whispered, "Please, help us." Millions heard it live, but no one moved. The bus rolled on. The hostage takers eventually released some passengers, but they held onto two, Silke Bischoff and her boyfriend, Jan Philipp Rebaum. They forced both into another vehicle, a red BMW, and the journey continued. They crossed the border into the Netherlands briefly, with German police unable to intervene outside their jurisdiction, but the escape was short-lived. Soon, they returned to German soil. Authorities realized this had to end. Near the town of Bad Honnef, police initiated a high-risk intervention. Officers in unmarked vehicles surrounded the BMW and moved in with force. The car was brought to a sudden stop, the windows shattered. The chaos lasted only seconds. Rösner and Degowski were quickly subdued. Both men were taken into custody. But amid the confrontation, Silke Bischoff was critically injured. She was transported to a nearby hospital. But despite all efforts, she did not survive. The country held its breath. Two young people, Emanuele and Silke, had lost their lives, and Germany would never look at live media coverage the same way again. The Gladbeck hostage crisis lasted 54 hours. It deeply impacted Germany's justice system, media culture, and public trust. The nation was horrified, not just by the actions of the hostage takers, but also by the role the media had played. Reporters had stepped far beyond the line. They had provided food and cigarettes to the criminals. They had blocked police routes. They had interviewed hostages with weapons inches away. The press was no longer just reporting the news. They had become part of the story. The backlash was immense. In the following months, Germany re-examined its journalistic ethics. New media guidelines were introduced. Police response protocols were updated. And the public was left with a question. How could something like this have happened in full view of the nation? Hans-Jürgen Rösner received a life sentence. He remains in prison to this day. Dieter Degowski also received life, but was released in 2018 under strict conditions and a new identity. His release reignited public debate. For many, the wounds were still open. Silke Bischoff became a symbol of innocence, of vulnerability, of how quickly a tragedy can unfold, even in front of cameras, even in broad daylight. There's a photograph taken just hours before she died, where she looks out through a car window. Her expression is calm, but the tension is unmistakable. It's the image of someone caught between two worlds, fear and the hope that someone, anyone, might still act. The Gladbeck hostage crisis wasn't just a crime. It was a turning point, a moment when Germany was forced to reckon with the power of media, the fragility of human lives, and the dangerous illusion of control. It left behind new laws, new questions, and a lasting silence. Thank you for listening to Storytime. True crime in audio. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing. More real cases, more careful storytelling, and more reasons to never forget what's behind the headlines. Until then, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and stay safe.